Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. What do you get when you mix misinformation about Nazis, alternate DC universes, and sour grapes about the 2016 presidential election? You get the SJW Hot mess, known as Crisis on Earth X. Crisis on Earth X was supposed to be the second crossover event from Greg Berlanti, and you would think after the disaster called Heroes and Aliens last year, he would have gone back to the drawing board to craft a crossover event between the four CW shows that would have shown the heroes taking on bad guys in a positive fashion. Unfortunately, this time, instead of adapting an event from DC Comics like he did with Invasion and doing it poorly, he decided to use the DC Universe as a soapbox to express his anger about Donald Trump being elected President of the United States. As I watched this Crisis on Earth X, it really disgusted me because the same cancer that damaged Marvel with this SJW politics has now infected the DC television universe. And when it comes down to that cancer, it looks like to me that these liberals just can't get over the fact that Donald Trump is the president of these United States. And instead of them making a top quality superhero show, they want to use their superhero show as a platform to go out here and make a statement about how much they don't like Donald Trump being president of these United States. Now, if these guys were to look at the whole picture of Donald Trump's election objectively, they would look at the parallels between the Nazis that they wanted to make a commentary about and the American state right now, because Nazi Germany was formed by a large majority of women voting for Adolf Hitler. And 60% of white women went out here and voted for Donald Trump. But your SJWs and your liberals, because they're beta males, always give white women a pass, and white women can never do anything wrong. Now, as we look at this crossover event in the first episode, they show us how racist they truly are. Now, they want to talk about Donald Trump being a racist, but in the opening scenes of your Crisis on Earth X, your SJW Greg Berlanti decides to make this alternate universe, a world taken over by Nazis, do something like emasculate James Olsen one mo again. Now, your James Olsen on Earth X is the Guardian, and he's dressed up in this Captain America knockoff costume, and he goes into action. Unfortunately, this super soldier is killed by Nazi Green Arrow, and once Nazi Arrow kills James Olsen, it pretty much shows how much of a hypocrite that your Greg Berlanti and your Mark Guggenheim truly are. They're going to take this shot at Donald Trump for being a racist, but they don't want to confront their own racism and their own issues as it relates to black men. Because here we have James Olsen, one more again, being emasculated on an episode of Supergirl. But he's the one who's going to use this DC universe as a platform and a soapbox to deal with his feelings about the 2016 presidential election, showing me how completely unprofessional Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim truly are. So, because they're going out of their way, instead of giving us an event related to the DC universe, no, they're going to use this whole 4 episodes of these DC television shows to go out here and then go out and make this commentary about Donald Trump and then talk about how this Earth X is run by Nazis. Really, they're, again, an underhanded statement about Donald Trump, but in the first 5 minutes, they show how hypocritical they are by emasculating this black man in the opening scene. And in this Crisis on Earth X, we've got Nazi Arrow, who has conquered the entire planet, and they found this portal that's going to take them to other planets. And what they want to do is they want to go to other planets to establish their whole Fourth Reich throughout the entire DC universe. This is one of the most puerile concepts I have ever heard of. And it's just so poorly done. You're going to go from different universe to conquer the entire universe. And they're helped by the Reverse Flash to do this. Basically, this entire story was stolen from Savage Time and the episode with the Justice Lords, and it's mixed with SJW Butthurt over the 2016 election. And this is why I call it the Crisis on Earth X, a SJW hot mess. Because when you look at the episode Savage Time, the episode Savage Time was a time travel story about Vandal Savage using a time machine to go back in time and let the Nazis win. And that story was really about Vandal Savage conquering the Earth, something he wanted to do, and the Justice League coming in to try to fix the timeline. And in that story, we had so many great stories about relationships between the characters. We had Diana Prince and Steve Trevor. We had Jon Stewart's interaction with Sergeant Rock. We had The Flash helping out. We had Martian Manhunter helping out and learning more about humanity. And we had Superman coming in and doing some things there and there. And with the Justice Lords, we saw a very, very powerful story about what happens when good guys cross the line. I mean, Justice Lords was an amazing story because it showed what happens when people out here go out here and do something that they believe for the greater good, and that greater good twists them into evil. Because the Justice Lord Superman, he was incredibly intense in his whole, he was caught up in his ideals that he was willing to even compromise his own beliefs to achieve what he believed to be peace. And the whole relationship with Batman, that one really was thought provoking because here you had Bruce Wayne and Justice Lord's Batman, and then Batman had to show him the reality of his own world. So you had the Dark Knight show the Justice Lord's Batman the light related to his world and how it had become a fascist state and how it really wasn't about helping people out. It was actually hurting people. So I look at Justice Lords, and it was 10 times the story that what your Greg Berlanti was trying to do. Because when I look at Greg Berlanti's attempt to make this Justice Lord story, it's really shallow. It's half done, and the reason why it's half done and shallow is because he's more focused on his feelings rather than focusing on developing a well-crafted story related to DC characters. Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, they were about telling a story about good guys and bad guys, but Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim, what they were all about was telling a story related to identity politics and all related to their feelings and pushing this SJW agenda. That's this SJW Crisis on Earth X. This isn't an event. It's leftist propaganda posing as a superhero show. It's something designed to manipulate people's feelings. The only reason why these Nazis were on this show as bad guys is because they represent the ultimate evil to liberals, but the irony is that these liberals show how evil they truly are by going out here and making the story so one-sided, because everything in these 4 episodes was so one-sided and so one-dimensional. None of these Nazi characters had any of the depth that your Justice Lord Superman had, your Justice Lord's Batman had, or any of the Justice Lords had. And the story didn't have any of the depth and complexity of Savage Time. As I look at this Crisis on Earth X, it's just a hot mess. And this story it really kicks off when Barry Allen is getting ready to get married, and then these Nazis come in. And when I looked at that scene, it was a really action-packed scene, but again, the whole thing showed how the show was paper thin and shallow, because as I was watching the show, there was just so much cringe-worthy dialogue in this Crisis on Earth X. I mean, the dialogue in this show was absolutely terrible, and the acting was so absolutely terrible. The Nazi Arrow, the Nazi Supergirl, they had absolutely no depth as characters. They absolutely had no personality as characters. They were just, again, simply there to express Greg Berlanti's views on Donald Trump and be a thinly veiled commentary about the direction of America. That's all this whole Crisis on Earth X was about, and it really showed a real crisis as it relates to many of these liberals and these SJWs, because they couldn't go out of their way to make an objective story. No, they made an emotional story, which was all about expressing their butthurt over this whole 2016 election and then trying to present it off as some sort of DC event. That's what's really the ultimate cheat as it related to this so called event. People came there looking for an event related to these superheroes where they take on the bad guys, but unfortunately, the bad guys were the executive producers of this show. And the reason why they are the bad guys as it relates to these DC shows is because they couldn't remain objective. They couldn't stay true to the source material. They couldn't tell a story as related to making these characters great and overcoming the challenges. No, they decided to use these characters as Mary Sues and ciphers so they could vent their frustrations about this 2016 presidential election. And everything comes across as so heavy handed in these 4 episodes. It's absolutely disgusting. Everything from the Nazi characters being so one dimensional to the concentration camp that they brought all the heroes to. All of this came across as all pure propaganda, and it didn't come across as a story with rich multidimensional characters. And the really thing that really irked me was seeing Berlanti push his SJW identity politics by having pushing openly homosexual characters and then talking about this was what went on in the concentration camp. He just pushed that to the forefront and he tried to make it look like he was trying to be so tolerant of everyone. But all we have to do is look at the first 5 minutes where James Olsen was murdered to see how hypocritical he truly was as it related to his so-called liberalism, diversity, and tolerance. Because you go out of your way in every episode of all of your shows to emasculate black men, degrade black men, and then in this alternate universe story, you have this white man kill this black man, and you're talking about diversity and tolerance because that's what he was trying to push in the imagery. But again, the hypocrisy showed in the first 5 minutes with the death of James Olsen. And as I looked at this event in over the 2 nights that it again showed me how little respect he had for the DC characters, how little respect he had for the DC source material, and how he had no real understanding of World War II, of Nazis, or of the big picture as it relates to things. He really just wanted to stick a middle finger up at Donald Trump. It was just all feelings on that screen, not anything as related to building a structured story. Now, I just said a couple of minutes ago that what led to the rise of Nazi Germany was not just people. It was just not the men, but it was the women, because a large majority of women voted for Adolf Hitler to be the new leader of Germany. In the same way, 60% of white women voted for Donald Trump to be the president of the United States. Now, you would think that would be the foundation of a story if you wanted to make a commentary on this whole Nazi thing, but Greg Berlanti, again, was in his feelings and not thinking logically. No, he was thinking emotionally, and he didn't want to talk about things as related to things like the National Socialist Party or the socialism that was all a part of Adolf Hitler's regime and how that was part of the whole economic situation that led to the rise of the Nazis. No, the Nazis here, they were just caricatures standing in for their ideas about Donald Trump and Trump supporters, and they gave the superheroes somebody to beat up on and somebody for Greg Berlanti to vent his frustrations about, because he really wanted to make a story about Trump supporters and Donald Trump, but he didn't have the courage to do it, so he used Nazis as a stand-in. And that's why those Nazi characters were so paper thin, and that paper thinness showed when several scenes, like the one where Arrow shoots Supergirl with a kryptonite arrow. Now, as it relates to kryptonite, all it has to be is within the vicinity of a Kryptonian, and they literally fall down. But Arrow shoots Supergirl with a kryptonite arrow, and she doesn't just die from it. She just doesn't fall down by even being in the vicinity of it. She gets stabbed by the arrow, and takes it out. And I'm looking at that and going, that's completely illogical, because I remember reading Superman Batman Public Enemies, where Metallo shot Superman with a kryptonite bullet, and he needed Batman to get it out because he was so weakened by the kryptonite he could barely move. But Supergirl, because these SJWs elevate women to incredibly high positions, has the power to take an arrow out of her own shoulder that has kryptonite in it. That was one of the most ridiculous scenes in this Crisis on Earth X. Also, as I call it, Crisis on Hot Mess. Because I looked at that scene and I said, it's clear to me that these guys are not really concerned about the source material. This was all about feelings. And then later on, we have Supergirl, the Nazi Supergirl, in the big final fight. She literally flies up in the air and explodes from whatever happened to her. And that, again, completely illogical when you look at this story. And the other part that really irked me was the Oliver Queen and the Nazi Oliver Queen, and he says he's going to kill him, and it made no sense to me. I mean, the whole thing made no sense to me. I mean, when I looked at Twaldini and Bruce Timm's Justice Lords, there was a lot in that story, because even later on in Justice League Unlimited, Superman, as he was dealing with his feelings as related to the Justice Lord Superman, he was having a lot of doubt regarding his own ideals and beliefs, because he feared becoming just like that Justice Lord Superman, because he always believed in doing what was best for the greater good, but he feared that the greater good could corrupt him. And that was one of the things that was a major part of Justice League Unlimited Season 1. When I look at those Paul Dini and Bruce Timm episodes of Justice League, they had tremendous depth as it related to these characters. But this Crisis on Earth X, there was no depth as related to these characters. There was no complexity. There was no thought-provoking story here. Characters were just put up on the screen, and they were just there to vent Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim's frustrations about the 2016 presidential election, with a few plot points thrown in here and there, like the death of Martin Stein, which was really just a way for the actor to exit out, because he's getting ready to go on Broadway and he was leaving the show anyway, so they just came up with this as a way to have him exit stage left. And then we had the tacked on wedding where Felicity decides she's going to marry Oliver Queen. And bringing back Felicity was like the jump the shark for Arrow. And that's really sad, because Arrow was starting to find his stride and the show was finally starting to pick up. And now we have Felicity back again, something most fans said that they hated back in the day, and they decide to bring it back one more again, all because, again, Greg Berlanti is not thinking objectively, the writers aren't thinking objectively, they're not thinking about the source material, because Oliver Queen was supposed to be with Black Canary, but he's not going to be with Black Canary in this show, because these writers decided they wanted to go off the rails, and Crisis on Earth X really showed how off the rails most of these Berlanti shows have become. I mean, this was the worst event I have ever seen. I didn't think you could go past Heroes and Aliens in the terms of fail, but this surpasses the disaster known as Heroes and Aliens last year. This is actually on the level as terrible as Batman v Superman, and even just as terrible as Justice League. I actually say it's worse than both of those movies, who were feature films. This Crisis on Earth X wasn't even a story. As I see it, this was just nothing more than a pure propaganda piece for SJWs to take a shot at Donald Trump. And that's what really upsets me about this, because this could have been a story that brought people into the DC television universe and made them fans. Instead, we got a SJW propaganda piece that alienated DC fans in the same way that Marvel Comics fans have been alienated by all the SJW agenda politics that have been pushed in their comics for the last 2 years. If this is the direction that DC's television shows are going to go in, they're going to be in a lot of trouble, because people don't go to comics to have somebody preaching identity politics to them and pushing an SJW agenda. No, they go to comics to get an escape, and they go to comics to see stories about heroes taking on bad guys. I didn't see any heroes taking on bad guys. All I saw were characters used as ciphers to express the anger and frustration of people about an election that happened over a year ago, and what they need to do is just get over it. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some SJS Direct titles like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, and the Temptation of John Haynes, and many other SJS Direct titles, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.